Oh, when it comes to the midterms, the media told you there was going to be a red wave. Republicans insisted there would be a red wave, but Democrats put up much more of a fight than many expected them to, and it might really change the party as it looks to the new Congress in the next 2 years of President Biden's presidency. Let's bring in our guest tonight, Democratic strategist Jonathan Harris, who's up late with me tonight here on the Final Five Live to talk about it. We should point out that, Jonathan, first of all, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Good to be back.
The Associated Press called the Arizona Senate race for Mark Kelly just a little while ago. Former President Trump on his social media platform, I'm going to read the exact quote here. They stole the electron from Blake Masters.
Oh, God. You know, if there's anything better than the Democrats performing better than everyone expected about these midterms, it will hopefully be the diminished influence and thus the diminished hearing from the former president. It's so exhausting. We're so much better than that.
Well, and especially, too, since I don't want this to turn into your perspective on former President Trump. I think we know where that stands. But, you know, there's going to be a lot of talk about him going into next week. It looks like he may announce another run for the presidency as soon as Tuesday. But let's talk about the Democrats, because, yeah, there was a lot of speculation that there was going to be, look, Democrats, the party with the White House always loses seats during a midterm. And yes, the Democrats lost seats in the House, but we're looking at a razor-thin majority, or a razor-thin margin right there at this point, and that's surprising to a lot of people. So who got this wrong?
Right, I think the average, according to the Washington Post, if I read that correctly, was I think the party that is not in power usually picks up about 29 seats, I think, on average, and the Republicans are slated to pick up single digits. So absolutely incredible. It can't be overstated how well the Democrats performed here, and it's interesting. I always want to kind of keep myself from falling into mocking former President Trump because it's so easy. But there were two things that kind of loomed over this election. One, him and the candidates that he endorsed, and also whether or not this was going to be portrayed by the Republicans as this huge indictment of Biden and everything that he's done. I mean, because they tried to sell this dystopian hellscape of crime and all of these things and say the economy was terrible, which it is not. There is inflation, but the economy otherwise is doing absolutely incredible. And I think there's something to be said for the fact that none of that worked, that at the end of the day, when voters went to the polls, it seems that they were more concerned about retaining their rights and things along those lines than believing in the fear tactics that the Republican Party was selling and the candidates that Trump was endorsing. So I'm dating myself here, but I believe it was maybe 2014. I could have that year wrong, when the Republican Party did that huge, what they called the Republican autopsy, when they lost badly. Yeah. And I think they'll probably be doing that again.
That was 2012. That was the Mitt Romney Barack Obama election. I remember that well. You're not dating yourself at all. But here's the deal, though. It looks like, again, Democrats, they need to win one more seat. Then they keep the Senate, whether it's Nevada, whether it's Georgia, and we may not know that for another month. But if the trends continue, Republicans will likely take over the House. So regardless of where people stand politically, you're going to have a split Congress. And I know it kills people to talk about bipartisanship, but if we're going to get anything done here, they're going to have to find some common ground. I think that's something, it's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, but that's really what you got to do some work for the people, that you can go to your voters and say, this is what we accomplished.
Absolutely. And one of the things, and, you know, again, it's hard when I have my analyst hat on, I don't really take sides, but as a commentator, I always have to kind of look at it from the way that it impacts Democrats. And I would say that there's something beneficial to Democrats about split government, in the sense that Republicans can no longer say that they're not involved. So they can't say that if there are laws that are being passed or things that are happening in the country, or even gridlock, that they're not involved. Well, we're not the party in power. We don't control the House. We don't control the Senate. When they're split government, they are forced to play ball and also take some responsibility for the state of the country, which I think overall will be good for the Democrats going forward as well.
Do you think, though, with the leadership in place right now, there's a lot of talk about it, whatever happens in the House, does Nancy Pelosi, does she remain Speaker, or does she remain in some sort of leadership role? You have Steny Hoyer as well. You have Chuck Schumer. You have these leaders who are, well over their 70s, into their 80s at this point. Is it time for some younger leadership within your party moving ahead?
That is so interesting. I was actually doing a lot of research on that going into the midterms. And that is one thing that's interesting about it is Nancy Pelosi had talked about before. She said that if it wasn't for Trump being elected, she would have retired. If Hillary Clinton had won the election, she would have retired. So clearly, I think retirement was on her mind. We know that her husband was just a victim of a horrible attack. And I think kind of coupling those together, I wouldn't be surprised if she maybe stepped back a little bit. But at the same time, she seems to have a tendency to, when she feels that there is a need for essentially the power that she wields in that position, to stay on. So that'll be interesting. And also the youth turnout was what staved off the so-called red wave that Republicans kept talking about, millennials and Gen Z going for the Democrats. So it'll be very interesting to see how the Democrats respond to seeing that a huge part of their voter base is in fact young voters. I think it was 63% of Gen Z and 51% of millennials went for the Democrats. So they're going to probably want to reflect some of that in their leadership as well.
Based on that, I saw some right-wing commentators saying maybe it's time to raise the voting age back to 21. Another story for another day. Jonathan Harris.
Of course.
I know I don't think that was serious, but who knows? Jonathan, good to see you again. Thanks for joining me.
Good to see you.
And the Final Five is back after this.